If you can answer me in Japanese, I'll tip you $1. $1? Please keep it. Thank you. Aurora Whitmore's voice sliced through the dining room, arrogant, amused, and meant to wound. Matthew froze only for a heartbeat. He had carried plates through tighter corners, dodged boiling water, survived worse insults. But this was brazen, intentional. She wanted a show. He turned, meeting her eyes with a calm that made her blink, and then he spoke. $1? Please keep it. Thank you. Flawless Tokyo Japanese. Smooth, precise, deadly. The reaction was instant. The Japanese investors at the table jerked upright, their expressions lighting with surprise. One whispered, "Perfect pitch," like a native. Another nodded slowly, impressed. Aurora's smile collapsed. Not faded, collapsed. Whatever she expected. A stutter, confusion, a bowing apology. It wasn't this. Not a server outshining her in the language she flaunted for power. Her fingers tightened on the stem of her wine glass. The red liquid trembled. 10 minutes earlier, those same investors had praised Matthew. He had introduced the menu in Japanese, joked lightly about the chef's seasonal choices, and bowed with cultural ease. They had tipped him generously, even asked how long he'd lived in Tokyo. Aurora didn't know that, but she felt it, felt the shift in the room, felt eyes sliding away from her and toward him, felt authority slipping out of her grip like sand. She hated the feeling. "Matthew," the manager hissed from behind him, "what are you doing?" But it was too late. The humiliation had already detonated. Aurora leaned in, voice low, sharp enough to cut skin. "Fire him. Immediately." The manager blanched. "Miss Whitmore, he didn't—" "Now." The word cracked like a whip. Matthew heard every syllable. He didn't react, didn't defend himself. He simply stepped back, spine straight, jaw steady. But inside something thrummed anger, yes, but deeper than that. A quiet refusal to shrink. One of the Japanese investors broke the silence. "Mr. Johnson," he asked politely, switching to Japanese, "did you study in Tokyo?" Matthew bowed his head. "For a time, before family circumstances brought me home." Again, impressed glances, respectful nods. Aurora saw it all, the acknowledgement she had wanted given to him instead. Her throat tightened. She took a sharp breath, forcing composure onto her face like armor. She turned to the table with a brittle smile. "Shall we continue?" But the investor's attention lingered on Matthew, not her. He moved toward the service station with smooth, practiced steps. The manager hurried after him, whispering furiously, "Why would you talk back? Do you understand what she can do? She owns half the block." Matthew didn't answer. He grabbed his tray, but his hand paused halfway. In the polished surface, he caught his reflection-tired eyes, steady breath, the weight of too many years spent being invisible. Not tonight. Across the room, Aurora tried to salvage the situation, but the stiffness in her posture betrayed her. The investors remained polite but detached. The blow to her pride had landed clean. Matthew felt the tension shift, subtle but real. Something inside him tightened, like a rope pulled to its final knot. His mother's voice drifted through memory. "Hold your head high, son, even when they try to make you bow." He exhaled slowly. Losing this job would break him financially. He knew it. Rent, medicine, his mother's care. Every number flashed in the back of his mind like warning lights. But dignity wasn't a luxury. It was the last thing he had. The manager tugged his sleeve. "Matthew, please, apologize to her before she leaves. She might take it back." Matthew turned, eyes level. "What exactly should I apologize for?" "That whatever you just did." "You mean speaking my own language? Or refusing to be mocked for entertainment?" The manager flinched. "That woman is a billionaire. You don't win against people like her." Matthew's voice dropped. "Then maybe people like her shouldn't win so easily." A tremor of conviction ran through him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply stood something he hadn't allowed himself to do in years. Aurora glanced toward them from across the dining room, her eyes narrowing. She could sense his lack of fear now, and it unsettled her far more than the Japanese itself. Matthew returned to work, but his movements came sharper, cleaner, like a man bracing for a storm. The room buzzed, whispers growing beneath the classical music. He set a fresh glass at a table, and as he straightened, he murmured something to himself, soft, almost like a vow. Justice isn't always fair, but dignity is something I still own. No dramatic flourish, no audience, just truth spoken into the quiet. Aurora watched him again, too long this time. There was something in his stance that she recognized, something that irritated her because she couldn't break it. Strength. Not loud, not aggressive, just unshakable, and she hated that it didn't belong to her. Matthew moved into the back corridor, letting the door swing shut behind him. The noise of the dining room faded, replaced by the hum of kitchen appliances and the sharp scent of seared steak. But the fire inside him didn't dim. He wasn't done. And Aurora Whitmore, whether she realized it or not, had just started a war she wouldn't easily win. Matthew pushed through the back corridor, the swing door whispering shut behind him, but the tension from the dining room clung to him like static electricity. The hum of the kitchen metal clanging, burners hissing, orders being shouted barely touched, the storm circling in his chest. He hung the serving cloth over his forearm, trying to steady his breathing, but the adrenaline refused to let go. His hands weren't shaking, but his thoughts were racing, sharp and fast, replaying Aurora's voice, "Fire him, immediately." The words hit him harder now that the moment had passed. He leaned against the counter just long enough to inhale, then stood straight again. Servers passing by sensed the weight on him but didn't slow. They carried trays, rushed orders, lived their own small battles. In a place like this, everyone learned to swallow fear on the go. Matthew, called Dwight, the older bartender with graying temples and a voice that always carried concern even when he tried to hide it. "You all right, son?" Matthew forced a nod. "I'm fine. What happened out there?" Dwight asked quietly while polishing a glass. The whole room went quiet for a minute. Matthew debated lying. He didn't. "She tried to use Japanese to humiliate me." Dwight paused mid-polish. "Aurora Whitmore?" "Yeah. And you answered her?" A small, tight smile. "In Japanese." Dwight let out a low whistle. "Well, that'll do it." But his amusement faded quickly, replaced by the worry of a man old enough to understand how power actually worked in this country. "Matthew, she's the kind of woman who doesn't take embarrassment lightly." "I know," Matthew said, softly. "She already told them to fire me." Dwight's jaw clenched. "Damn." Matthew shrugged like it didn't matter, but his chest felt tight. The thought of losing everything, his job, his stability, the fragile balance he'd built around his mother's care pressed on him like a weight he couldn't push off. Dwight put the glass down, voice lower. "Listen, you keep your dignity, but don't let pride sink you. If there's a window to walk this back, maybe walk it back?" Matthew's voice edged sharper than he intended. "For what? Speaking a language I studied? For not letting someone talk to me like I'm dirt?" Dwight held up a calming hand. "I'm just saying, think carefully tonight." Matthew appreciated the advice. Even if every part of him rejected the idea of bowing to someone like Aurora, she had struck at something deep, an old bruise that never healed right. For people like him, one public humiliation could become a lifetime label. He knew that story too well. Before he could answer, a server poked her head in. "Table 12 needs clearing. Matt." He nodded and pushed forward again, slipping his anger into the same inner pocket where he hid everything else. He moved through the kitchen with purpose, weaving past cooks and servers until he stepped back into the main dining room. The energy had shifted. It felt like stepping into the eye of a storm. Conversations simmered, but there were glances toward him, toward Aurora, toward the investors. People knew something had happened. They just didn't know what. Matthew began clearing the table with clean, controlled motions. His heartbeat had settled into something stronger than panic resolve. As he stacked the plates, he caught a low voice behind him. "He's exceptional," one Japanese investor murmured to another in Japanese. And she? The sentence trailed off, unfinished but unmistakable. The other investor sighed. Americans who misuse our language to show superiority rarely understand what they reveal about themselves. Matthew didn't react outwardly, but something in him steadied, like a beam reinforced. As he stepped away, a hand gently touched his elbow. "Matthew," whispered Julia, one of the senior servers. Her tone was urgent. "The manager's looking for you. She's shaken. Whatever happened with Aurora? It's spreading fast." "I know," he said. "Thanks." He walked toward the office, passing a row of mirrors lining the hallway. Each reflection showed the same man. Tired eyes, strong spine, a face that had endured more judgment than anyone here would ever guess. He had learned to let insults slide, to smile through microaggressions, to work twice as hard for half the recognition. But today, hearing Aurora twist a language he loved into a weapon, something snapped. Or maybe something finally stood up. The manager, a short woman named Denise whose nerves frayed easily, opened the office door before he even knocked. "Matthew, get in here quick." He stepped inside. She shut the door behind him like they were avoiding a mob. "What were you thinking?" she hissed, pacing. "She's Aurora Whitmore. She's one of the highest profile clients we have. She can crush us. She can crush you." "I didn't disrespect her," Matthew said calmly. "I just answered her question." "In Japanese," Denise cried. Better than she could. "Is that a crime now?" "No, but embarrassing a billionaire in front of foreign investors is." She stopped pacing long enough to press her palms to her temples. "Do you understand what she asked me to do?" "Fire me," Matthew said quietly. Denise sank into her chair. "Yes, tonight, before she leaves." "So that's it then?" Matthew asked. "Good service, perfect record, 3 years straight, and one moment of not being someone's punching bag means I'm out?" "Matthew." Her voice softened. "I know it's not fair, but fairness isn't how this business works." His jaw tightened. That phrase, the one older Americans knew too well, struck a chord. Fairness isn't how this business works. It sounded like every justification he'd ever heard for why someone like him was expected to accept less. Less respect, less opportunity, less humanity. Denise hesitated. "I haven't done it yet. I'm stalling. But she's expecting a decision tonight. I'm running out of time." Matthew looked at the floor, then at the framed certificates on her wall, then finally back at her. "If she wants me gone because I refuse to be humiliated," he said, "then maybe this place was never mine to keep." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Denise swallowed, her eyes softening with something that might have been guilt. "Matthew, go finish your shift. I'll figure out what I can." He nodded and stepped out of the office. The hallway felt colder now, but his mind clearer. He walked back into the dining room, and the moment his foot crossed the threshold, Aurora's gaze snapped to him from across the room. Sharp, calculating. Offended pride wrapped in billionaire entitlement, and behind that gaze, something else flickered. The silent promise of a woman used to winning every battle she entered. Matthew held her stare for one breath, only one. Then he turned away and continued working, not with defeat, with purpose, with dignity. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, one truth anchored him more firmly than fear. He would not be erased quietly, not again, not by her. And the storm that had started with one sentence, "If you can answer me in Japanese," was only getting stronger. Matthew stepped back into the dining room with the resolve of a man walking through smoke, steady but suffocating. The elegant hum of conversation washed over him again, polished voices, clinking silverware, the soft slide of chairs, but beneath it all ran a pulse of tension that hadn't been there an hour ago. He could feel it moving under the surface, following him like a shadow. Aurora's eyes still burned into his back, sharp enough to slice through layers of composure. She wanted him gone. She had said as much, but for tonight, until Denise finally yielded, he still had a job to finish. And in a place like this, you finish the job, even if it was your last night breathing the air inside these velvet walls. He picked up his tray and moved toward the service counter, but a familiar tremor inside him whispered of old wounds. Echoes from years past seeped back. Boarding the flight home from Tokyo, heart heavy, wallet empty, mother's voice shaky over the phone. "Come home, baby. I need you." He had felt failure tightening around him then. He felt it now. Yet something else stirred beneath it, anger. Yes, but also a strange clarity. He wasn't the same kid who stepped off that plane. Dinner service pressed forward, relentless, and he kept moving with it. Table by table, plate by plate, he locked himself into rhythm. Rhythm meant survival. Survival meant focus. But even as his body worked, his mind churned. Dwight's warning echoed. Men like us don't win battles with billionaires. Matthew knew the truth in that. But tonight he also knew something Dwight hadn't said. Sometimes you don't fight to win. Sometimes you fight because letting yourself be stepped on one more time would break something inside you permanently. At table 9, an older couple regulars smiled as he approached. "Good evening, Matthew," the woman said warmly. "How's your mother doing?" "Hanging in there," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "Thank you for asking. Tell her we're praying for her," the man added. A small, grateful nod. Moments like this, the kindness of strangers, the simple acknowledgement of his humanity struck deeper than they knew. Community, memory, respect. Values older Americans carried like heirlooms, and values Aurora Whitmore clearly had no use for. He cleared the table with practiced grace, but just as he turned, a tall, broad-shouldered server named Jamal intercepted him. "Bro," Jamal murmured. "I heard about the thing with Whitmore. You good?" "I will be," Matthew answered. "You sure? Because she looks like she's plotting your funeral from across the room. Let her plot." Jamal whistled low. "Man, you're cold-blooded." But Matthew wasn't cold. He was holding himself together with threads. He didn't say that. Instead, he moved on. As he approached the kitchen, a sharp voice called behind him. Matthew. His body tensed instinctively. But it wasn't Aurora. It was one of the Japanese investors, Mr. Takeda, standing a few feet away. The man offered a small bow. Matthew returned it automatically. "You're Japanese," Takeda said, choosing his English carefully, "is refined, respectful. You carry it with sincerity." "Thank you, sir," Matthew replied quietly. "I studied for several years." "It shows," Takeda said. Then, a subtle glance toward Aurora's table. "Not everyone speaks a language to understand. Some speak it to dominate." The words landed heavy. Takeda lowered his voice. "Be careful tonight. Pride injured is more dangerous than pride displayed." Matthew understood the warning. He nodded, grateful. As Takeda returned to his table, Matthew felt the entire room shift again, like the current had picked up speed. Aurora was watching the interaction, jaw tight, eyes hardening, a dangerous mix, humiliation and scrutiny. He continued working, but the tension coiled tighter around him with every step. At 9:42 p.m., Denise emerged from the office, pale and sweating. She motioned for him. He met her by the wine station. "Matthew," she whispered. "She's not letting it go. She's furious. I can't stall anymore." "So this is it? She wants you fired before she leaves the building." Matthew's breath held for a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of inevitability. "Do I sign something?" he asked. Denise shook her head. "Just finish your shift quietly. I'll process it after close." "I see. I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "Really, I am." He believed her. Denise was a good person trapped in a bad position, another casualty of hierarchy. Matthew stepped away without bitterness, but his chest felt carved open. He had 1 hour left before his world tipped, 1 hour before the ground under him cracked again. He returned to the dining room with a strange calm. Not peace, something stronger than that. Acceptance sharpened into resolve. He moved to clear another table when Julia hurried toward him, breathless. "Matthew, she's coming this way." He looked up. Aurora Whitmore moved across the dining room with the precision of a person used to making people part like water. Her heels struck the floor like declarations. Her expression was composed but simmering beneath. She stopped directly in front of him. "Matthew," she said, her voice low yet razor-edged, "I hope you understand the consequences of what you did tonight." He met her gaze without blinking. "I answered your question. You humiliated me." "No," he replied quietly. "You underestimated me." A muscle in her cheek twitched. "You may think your little performance impressed my guests, but what you did was insubordination." "If speaking respectfully in another language is insubordination," Matthew said, "then maybe the problem isn't the language." Conversations around them slowed. People pretended not to listen, but they listened. Aurora leaned in, voice icy. "You don't belong in a place like this." Matthew held her stare. "Then why were your guests more comfortable speaking to me than you?" The room went silent. Not loudly silently. A stunned vacuum. It was the first time Matthew had ever spoken like that to someone with power. Aurora drew a slow breath, her expression stiffening into a mask. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Whitmore Global Headquarters. You will come." "For what?" "To explain yourself," she said sharply, "and to understand what happens next." She turned and walked away before he could answer. Matthew stood still, not shaken, not afraid, just standing, the way a man stands when he knows a line has been crossed and can never be uncrossed. Julia whispered urgently behind him, "Matt, what was that?" "A beginning," he said softly, "or an end. I guess we'll find out tomorrow." As the night wound down and the last guests trickled out, Matthew finished his duties silently. Chairs were straightened, candles blown out, linens gathered. By the time he walked out the back doors into the cool Manhattan night, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever waited inside that skyscraper tomorrow morning wasn't just about a job. It was about dignity, about truth, about years of being spoken over, spoken down to, erased. Tonight had drawn a line. Tomorrow would test it. He inhaled the night air, steadying himself. "Justice may not be fair," he murmured, "but it remembers." And he kept walking into the darkness, ready for the next storm. Matthew barely slept. He lay on his back, staring at the cracked ceiling of his small Harlem apartment, counting the hairline fractures branching across the plaster like a map of every place his life had split and rerouted. Aurora's voice kept echoing in the dark. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., you will come." He didn't know what waited inside Whitmore Global, but the threat behind her words was unmistakable. The power imbalance was familiar, so familiar it felt like stepping back into a version of himself he thought he'd long outgrown. At 5:42 a.m., he gave up on sleep entirely and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. The cold floor shocked him into motion. He brewed cheap coffee, showered quickly, shaved with careful strokes, and pulled on the cleanest shirt he owned. Not new, not expensive, but crisp, respectable, presentable. The kind of shirt a man wore when he had to face someone who believed the world was arranged in her image. By 7:10, he left the apartment, the morning air brisk and biting. Harlem was waking up, shop owners rolling open metal grates, buses groaning down the avenue, older men standing outside the laundromat sipping from paper cups and greeting anyone they recognized. "Morning, Matt," called Mr. Richardson, a retired postal worker who'd known Matthew since he was a boy. "You're dressed sharp today." "Big day," Matthew replied. "Job interview?" "Something like that." "Well," Richardson said, lifting his cup, "walk in with your spine straight. Folks respect that." Matthew nodded. "Yes, sir." Those simple exchanges, respect shared, not demanded, fortified him more than he admitted. He boarded the subway, gripping the cool metal pole as the train roared through dark tunnels. Reflections flashed across the windows. Tired faces, guarded eyes, people holding their lives together on commutes that never seemed to end. Matthew saw himself in all of them, and none of them at once. At 8:32 a.m., he arrived in Midtown Manhattan. Whitmore Global towered above him, steel, glass, and ego polished into architectural dominance. He inhaled once, then stepped inside. The lobby felt colder than the morning air. A wall of screens looped corporate slogans: innovation, integrity, inclusion, words that rang hollow after last night. The receptionist glanced up. Name? Matthew Johnson. Her expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. She had been briefed. Take the elevator to the 42nd floor. Miss Whitmore is expecting you. Expecting, not welcoming. Matthew stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers climb. He felt his heartbeat steady itself, not from calm but from readiness. The doors opened onto a minimalist hallway where everything from the lighting to the silence reminded him he was stepping onto someone else's battlefield. Aurora's assistant, a slender woman with clipped words and anxious eyes, gestured quickly. This way. They entered a glass-walled conference room with a skyline view that looked engineered to intimidate. Aurora stood at the far end, back straight, arms crossed. She didn't greet him, didn't motion for him to sit. She let silence stretch until it felt intentional. Then, "You made quite a spectacle last night." Matthew remained standing. "I answered your question. You humiliated me in front of investors who control over $200 million of international partnerships." "With respect," Matthew said carefully, "I didn't humiliate you. I just refused to be humiliated." Her eyes narrowed. "You spoke as though you had the right." "I do have that right," Matthew replied. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried. Aurora exhaled through her nose, the controlled kind of breath people use when they're choosing which weapon to draw. "Tell me something, Mr. Johnson. Where did you learn Japanese?" "Tokyo University of Foreign Studies," he answered. "I had a scholarship. I lived in Japan for 2 years before returning to take care of my mother." She blinked once, tight. She hadn't expected pedigree. "And you chose to become a waiter?" "I chose to work," Matthew said. "Life doesn't pause because dreams do." A flicker crossed Aurora's face. Sympathy? No. Recognition? Maybe. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by a thin smirk. "You presume your talent makes you equal to me." "No," Matthew replied. "My humanity does." The silence after that was different, not icy weighted. Aurora stepped closer, heels clicking like punctuation marks against the polished floor. "You understand that I could end your career in this city." "I don't have a career," Matthew said plainly. "I have a job. Or, I had one." "You're saying Denise fired you?" "She told me she would finalize it after close." "Good." Aurora's tone was sharp, but there was a tremor under it. Not uncertainty, defensiveness. "Actions have consequences." "Yes," Matthew said softly, "including yours." Something in her eyes flared anger mixed with the uneasy sting of hearing truth spoken without fear. "You really aren't afraid of me," she said. "Should I be? Most people are. Most people haven't survived what I have." Another silence. Longer this time. She turned away, pacing toward the windows as if the skyline held answers. "Do you know what those investors said after you left?" she asked. "No, they were impressed. With you. Is that a problem?" "Yes," she snapped, spinning toward him, "because I'm the one building relationships with Japan. I'm the one fluent in their business culture. I'm the one they're supposed to see as competent." "Then maybe speak to them," Matthew said quietly, "not down to them." Her jaw tightened. "You're lecturing me now? I'm telling the truth." She stared at him so long he felt the shift before she spoke. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., was supposed to be your termination meeting. And now?" "Now," she said slowly, "I'm reconsidering." That startled him more than a threat would have. "Why?" "Because," Aurora admitted grudgingly, "you understand something most people in my boardroom never grasp. You speak a language not just with your mouth, but with your posture, your diligence, your restraint." She took one more step toward him, "And people listen to you." Matthew didn't move. He didn't nod, didn't thank her. He just waited. Aurora looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Annoyance? Respect? Resentment? Curiosity? A mixture of all. "This isn't over," she said at last. "Today is not the punishment. It's the beginning of an evaluation, and tomorrow morning I'll decide what you become next." "I'm not asking to become anything," Matthew replied. "I just want dignity." A muscle in her expression softened barely. "We'll see," she said. "For now, you're dismissed." Matthew turned toward the door, but before he reached it, she added quietly, so quietly he almost missed it, "You're not what I expected." He paused. Then, "Neither are you." He left the room before the impact of those words could settle. As he walked down the corridor toward the elevators, he felt it, the shift, subtle but unmistakable. A door had not closed. A door had opened. And whatever awaited on the other side was bigger than one woman's pride and one man's job. It was the start of something neither of them fully understood yet. But Matthew felt the truth deep in his chest as he stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the threshold. Matthew stepped out of the elevator into the cool morning air, but the crisp Manhattan wind did nothing to settle the unease coiling beneath his ribs. The meeting with Aurora had left him in a strange, suspended space, not fired, not safe, not free. Evaluated, judged, watched. He hated that word more than losing a job. Being evaluated meant someone like Aurora believed she had the authority to measure his worth with her own yardstick. On the subway ride back uptown, his reflection in the window flickered with each passing tunnel light. He looked calm. He didn't feel calm. The train screeched to a stop at 125th Street. Harlem felt different in the morning, busier, louder, more alive with movement and grit than the polished world Aurora belonged to. That contrast cut him more sharply today. He walked the 4 blocks home, unlocked the apartment door, and stepped inside to the faint scent of peppermint tea. His mother was awake. "Matthew?" Her soft voice called from the living room recliner. He forced his shoulders to soften before she could see the tension in his face. "Morning, Ma." "You're dressed up," she noted, studying him with eyes that had grown sharper as her health faded. "Something happen at work?" "Long night," he said, dodging the question gently. "How are you feeling?" "Old," she laughed, but her smile wavered. "Your face looks tired, baby. What's weighing on you?" For a moment, he wanted to tell her everything. Aurora's arrogance, her fury, the humiliation, the firing, the evaluation, the uncertainty. But burdening her wouldn't change anything. It would just shift the weight onto a woman who had carried enough for a lifetime. "Nothing I can't handle," he said finally. "I just need to keep moving forward." "You always do," she whispered proudly. "That's why you're going to be all right." He wished he believed it as strongly as she did. After breakfast, he tucked her blanket around her knees and headed out again. He needed to clear his mind before the next shift, needed to think, needed to decide who he wanted to be when he walked into the Sterling room tonight, because Aurora had set a tone, but she would not define him. By late afternoon, he clocked in at the restaurant with the weight of the morning still tugging at him. Denise approached immediately. "Matthew," she whispered, pulling him aside. "I don't know what you said to her this morning, but she called." He braced for the blow. "She told me not to fire you. Not yet. Not yet," he repeated quietly. The stay of execution. Denise gave him a helpless look. "Just keep your head down tonight, please." But keeping his head down was what had put him in this position for years. He nodded anyway. Rush hour began. Orders flew. Plates clattered. The dining room swelled with customers wrapped in conversation. Despite the chaos, Matthew moved with focus until 7:10 p.m., when the trouble began. A drunk customer at table 5 knocked over a water glass. The spill spread fast across the linen. Matthew reached to blot it, but before he could, Aurora's voice rang out from across the room. "Unacceptable." She strode toward them with quick, furious steps, as though the spilled water had personally insulted her. "Matthew," she said loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear, This is your station. Maintain control." The customer shook his head. "Ma'am, it was my fault." But Aurora cut him off and switched to Japanese, tossing out an insult she assumed only the investors would understand. "He's only good for cleaning floors." The words cracked through Matthew's chest like a whip. The investors glanced up sharply, disapproval flashing across their faces. They understood. They all understood. And Aurora didn't care. She expected Matthew to shrink, expected him to look down, to bow, to accept the degradation in silence. Not tonight. He straightened slowly, the napkin still in his hand, calm, controlled, unmoving. "I understand you," he said softly in Japanese, flawless once again. Loud enough for her, loud enough for the investors, every word. The customers around them stilled. Even the pianist hesitated. Aurora blinked, twice, hard. That familiar mix of shock and anger returned, tightening her expression. Her lips pressed together until they lost color. It was the second time he had turned her own weapon back on her, and it burned. "You're out of line," she hissed. "No," Matthew replied, still in Japanese. "I am simply refusing to be belittled." Aurora's breath faltered. For the first time all night, she looked unsure of her footing. The Japanese investors watched them with intense interest. One of them said gently, "Miss Whitmore." "Perhaps a misunderstanding?" She snapped back to English. "There is no misunderstanding." But the investors exchanged glances. They were not impressed by her assertiveness now. They were disturbed. Matthew felt that shift, felt how quickly her attempts at dominance were beginning to undermine her credibility. Denise rushed over, sweating. "Is everything all right here?" "No," Aurora snapped. "Get him under control." Matthew didn't flinch, didn't retreat, but he understood something he hadn't before this moment. Aurora wasn't just angry. She was threatened. She was losing grip on her narrative, her authority, her face in front of the very people whose perception of her mattered most. And she blamed him for every crack. That realization settled over him like a mantle. She wasn't just reacting to him. She was reacting to what he represented, competence she didn't control, dignity she couldn't erase, truth she couldn't twist without witnesses noticing. Denise stammered, "Matthew, maybe step into the back. I'm working," he said calmly. He finished blotting the table, lifted the wet linens, and carried them to the service station. Every step was deliberate, unhurried, steady. He refused to break his rhythm for someone who wanted to see him shatter. Behind him, Aurora seethed, but she didn't follow. She didn't dare escalate with the investors watching her so closely. Instead, she turned away abruptly, leaving a trail of tension behind her like static in the air. Matthew exhaled, letting the storm settle in his chest. But something fundamental had changed tonight. Not in Aurora, in him. The line he had crossed yesterday was nothing compared to the one he crossed now. He wasn't simply refusing to bow. He was refusing to disappear. And he knew, he could feel it in the tightening gears of the night, that whatever came next would be bigger, sharper, and far more dangerous than anything before. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. Matthew worked through the rest of his shift with a strange, simmering clarity, the kind that settles over a man when the lines have finally been drawn and there's no turning back. The Sterling room hummed with polished elegance, but beneath the gold light and murmured conversations, every step he took felt like moving through a battlefield, quiet, controlled, but charged with invisible pressure. He could sense eyes on him, whispers from staff, curious glances from diners, the Japanese investors observing with a mixture of sympathy and intrigue. And somewhere across the room, Aurora tracked his movements with a gaze that flickered between contempt and calculation. She did not approach him again, but tension radiated off her like heat from a furnace. Matthew reached the service station just as Dwight slid a glass of water toward him. "You look like a man walking along the edge of a blade," Dwight murmured. "I'm all right," Matthew said, though his pulse begged to differ. "No, son. You're standing in the middle of a storm with a paper shield." Dwight leaned in. You keep saying you're fine, but I've seen that look. You're braced for a hit, and it's coming." "I know," Matthew admitted quietly, "but I'm done hiding from it." Dwight gave him a long, proud look, the kind older men gave younger ones when they saw a backbone forming under pressure. "Then whatever happens next," he said, "do it with your head high." Matthew nodded and moved on, carrying glasses toward the back. But as he pushed through the corridor door, a sudden sting shot up his wrist. He winced. The pain pulsed, sharp and unexpected. He flexed his fingers, realizing too late what had happened. Earlier, when rushing to the spill at table 5, he had caught his hand on a jagged tray edge. He hadn't noticed in the chaos. Now the wound pulsed, aggravated by the weight of the trays he'd been lifting since. He tried to shake it off. The night wasn't over, and he couldn't afford to look weak, not while Aurora watched for any excuse to cut him down. But by the time he returned to the kitchen, his grip trembled slightly. Julia saw it instantly. "Matthew," she whispered urgently, "your hand. What happened?" "It's nothing. It doesn't look like nothing." She grabbed a clean towel and wrapped it around his wrist with gentle firmness. "You need to tell Denise." "No, you're hurt. I'm not giving Aurora another reason to call me incompetent." Julia hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But please be careful. She wants you out, so don't give her ammunition." He appreciated her concern but didn't answer. He walked back out into the dining room just as the energy shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Aurora rose from her table, her posture stiff, her chin angled high, and she was heading straight toward him again. Denise saw it too and nearly sprinted across the room. "Miss Whitmore," she whispered anxiously, "is there something I can help with?" Aurora ignored her completely. She stopped 3 feet in front of Matthew, looking him up and down as though inspecting a soldier before dismissal. "You're limping," she said. "I'm not," Matthew replied evenly. "Your movements are off. They're fine. Show me your hands." "No." Her eyes narrowed. "I gave you a direct instruction." "I'm not under your employment contract," he replied calmly. "I'm under Denise's, and my hands are my business." The refusal caught her off guard. It flickered across her expression, the shock of someone unaccustomed to being told no by anyone below boardroom level. "Are you injured?" she demanded. "I'm capable of doing my work." "That's not what I asked. That's the answer you're getting." Her breath hitched, a small, tight sound of frustration she couldn't hide. The investors watched with growing discomfort. This was no longer a professional exchange. It was personal, too personal. Aurora lowered her voice. "You think your defiance makes you righteous?" Matthew held her gaze. "No, I think it makes me human. You're lecturing me again. I'm correcting you." "There's a difference." That struck her like a slap. She stepped closer. "Too close. You do not get to correct me. You don't get to." A sudden shout cut through the room. "Service at table 12. A panicked server pointed frantically. A guest had dropped a plate-shattering glass, splattering sauce, startling nearby diners. Instinct surged through Matthew before thought could catch up. He moved toward the table, weaving around chairs with practiced speed. But as he bent to pick up the shards, pain shot like electricity up his injured wrist. He gritted his teeth and ignored it. He cleared the mess with swift, efficient motions. The shaken guest apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, young man. I didn't mean to." "It's all right," Matthew said warmly. "You're safe. That's what matters." The guest smiled, visibly touched. Across the room, Aurora watched the interaction with something unreadable tightening her eyes. This composure, this dignity under pressure, this unwavering competence made it harder for her to cling to the narrative she had built about him, and that unsettled her more than anger ever could. When Matthew straightened, a drop of blood trickled from under the towel around his wrist. Aurora noticed it. Her face changed, not with empathy, but with the instinct of someone who just spotted a structural weakness. "You are injured," she said sharply. "You hit it. It doesn't affect my work. You cannot evaluate that. I can." "No," Matthew replied softly. You can only judge me, and you already decided to. Her lips parted slightly, stung by the accuracy. You're reckless, she snapped. No, he said. I'm responsible. There's a difference. You should have reported the injury. If I did, I'd be sent home, and then you would claim I abandoned my shift. We both know how this goes. Aurora inhaled slowly, caught in the truth. He said nothing more. Instead, he returned to his duties, left her standing there, forced to absorb the reality she had not expected. He saw through her, and he wasn't afraid. The rest of the night unfolded with steady intensity. Matthew worked through pain, through tension, through the relentless throb in his wrist, fueled by something stronger than stubbornness purpose. A purpose she could not name but clearly felt. When the shift ended and he hung up his apron, Dwight clasped his shoulder. You stood tall tonight, son, but the price, it's coming. Matthew nodded. I know. So what now? Matthew looked toward the exit, toward the city beyond it, toward tomorrow. Now, he said quietly, I stopped playing defense. He didn't walk out defeated. He walked out decided. Whatever storm was forming between him and Aurora wasn't going to swallow him whole. Not anymore. Not ever again. Matthew woke the next morning with a throb still pulsing through his wrist, a dull reminder of the night before, but his mind was sharper than the ache. Something had changed, not in his circumstances, those were still precarious, dangling by a thread of Aurora Whitmore's shifting whims, but inside him. A click, a shift, a decision. He wasn't merely reacting anymore, he was preparing. By mid-afternoon, he headed back to the Sterling room for another shift, moving carefully to keep pressure off his injured wrist. The city felt different today, like the air carried a charge, like the world around him was bracing for the next move before he even made it. When he pushed open the restaurant door, he immediately sensed tension in the room, staff speaking in hushed voices, managers pacing, the jazz pianist running the same nervous scale over and over. Something had everyone rattled. And then he saw the reason. Aurora Whitmore was already there, early, positioned at the center of the dining room like a queen on a battlefield, her posture sharper than her tailored suit, her gaze swept the room like she owned the oxygen. The moment she saw Matthew, she didn't hide the way her attention locked onto him. She studied him, not just with irritation now, but with a new, probing intensity, as if she were trying to decipher him, understand the shape of the threat he posed. The thought almost made him laugh. He was a server with an aching wrist and overdue bills. She was a billionaire who could end him with a single phone call. But somehow, he had shaken her. That realization put steel in his spine. Denise rushed over, flustered. Matthew, she whispered, I didn't know she'd show up this early. Just be careful, she's in one of those moods. He nodded and clocked in, though his mind stayed alert. Every instinct told him tonight would not be like the others. The dinner rush began fast, a swell of customers sweeping in all at once. Matthew moved through the maze of tables with practiced precision, keeping his injured wrist steady, angling it against the strain, refusing to give Aurora even the faintest sign of weakness. But he could feel her watching him, calculating, analyzing, like a chess player trying to decide her next move. At one point, he passed close enough to hear her low conversation with one of the Japanese investors who had returned tonight. I assure you, Aurora said smoothly, we maintain the highest standards of professionalism here. The investor glanced past her, eyes landing on Matthew. Professionalism, he repeated slowly, is measured by how one treats the people with the least power. Aurora stiffened. It wasn't an insult, but it landed like one. Matthew continued walking as if he hadn't heard, though the words vibrated through him with a quiet pride. His shift intensified as the evening went on. The air thickened with heat and tension, servers moving too quickly, mistakes happening more often than usual. A tray of glasses slipped from a new server's hand and crashed to the floor. Aurora's head snapped toward the sound instantly. Her eyes narrowed, just waiting for a reason to strike. Before she could, Matthew stepped in. "I've got it," he said gently to the anxious server. "Go get a broom." He crouched to pick up the pieces, even though bending made the pain flare up his wrist. He didn't wince. Not once. When he rose, Aurora was already walking toward him. "You're covering for staff errors now?" she asked sharply. "Trying to play hero?" "Just doing my job," Matthew replied, professionally. Her lips tightened. A vein pulsed just beneath her jawline. For a second, he saw something crack in her, some frustration that wasn't about him at all but about herself. But whatever that was, she buried it quickly. "Meet me in the private dining room," she said. Not a request, a command. He followed her down the hallway, every sense on alert. The private room was quiet, lit only by a warm lamp in the corner. Aurora closed the door behind them, then turned. "You're becoming a problem," she said. "For you?" he asked. The question disarmed her for a beat. Her eyes flashed. "You're challenging me in my own establishment. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't disrespected you. I haven't refused an order except the ones that weren't yours to give. You know exactly what I mean." "I'm not challenging you," Matthew said steadily. "I'm refusing to sink." For the first time, Aurora didn't speak immediately. She studied him with something colder, deeper curiosity sharpened by irritation. "You understand that your behavior could cost you more than just a job. I understand. And yet you keep pushing." "No," he said. "I'm standing still." "You're the one pushing," she inhaled sharply, as if the truth cracked something in her composure. "Your injury," she pivoted suddenly. "Why did you conceal it? Don't lie." "Because I didn't want you using it against me." That honesty struck her harder than defiance. "You think I'd do that? You already have, just not with injuries." She stiffened. Her expression flickered hurt. No, not hurt, something closer to realization. A realization she immediately rejected. "You presume too much," she said. "Or you see too little," Matthew countered. They stood there, two people from different worlds locked in a silence that felt dangerously close to something neither wanted to name. Finally, Aurora spoke, voice low. "You don't fear me. I still don't understand why." "Because fear is what you expect," Matthew said. "And I'm not here to perform." A breath. Sharp. Controlled. "You are infuriating. You are unpredictable," he replied. "And that makes you dangerous." She seemed to absorb that, her jaw tightening, not in anger this time, but contemplation. "You keep surprising me," Aurora admitted. "Most people fold when I push. I'm not most people." Clearly, silence stretched again, heavy and buzzing. She broke it first. "Tomorrow," she said, "the evaluation continues. You will meet me at Whitmore Global, 10 a.m. For what? To determine whether you're worth my time or my resources." He almost laughed at that. "Almost. You're evaluating me," he said, "because you don't know what to do with me." Her eyes flashed again, but this time with something that looked frighteningly close to truth. "Go finish your shift," she said abruptly. She stepped past him, reached for the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Without turning back, she said quietly, "You are not what I expected. Neither are you." She stilled for a fraction of a second, but only a fraction before exiting the room. Matthew exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the encounter settle into his bones. The room felt smaller now, warmer, charged. The midpoint had arrived, and he knew it. He wasn't just part of the storm anymore. He was shaping it. The moment he returned to the dining room, Dwight shot him a knowing look. "Well?" Matthew didn't slow his stride. "Something's shifting. For better or worse." Matthew didn't answer, not because he didn't know, because it was both. As he resumed work, he carried a truth he couldn't name yet, but felt deeply. Whatever this was becoming, whatever this tension between him and Aurora was turning into it, would change everything, for both of them. Matthew returned to the dining room after his private confrontation with Aurora, but nothing about the room felt the same anymore. The lights felt harsher, the chatter sharper, every movement around him tinged with a tension that hadn't been there an hour ago. It wasn't the customers. They were absorbed in their meals, in their conversations, in their world of linen, napkins, and discreet luxury. No. The tension came from the staff, from the way Denise hovered near the bar, glancing at him every few seconds, from the way Julia whispered nervously to Dwight, from the way Jamal mouthed, "You good, man?" when he passed. Matthew nodded once, but he wasn't good, not because he was scared, but because something inside him was shifting too quickly for comfort. He jumped back into work, but the sense of equilibrium never returned. He moved through the room with steady precision, but part of him kept replaying his conversation with Aurora, breaking it apart, examining it like a puzzle he didn't realize he was solving. She wasn't just angry. She was conflicted, and that alone was dangerous. By 7:45 p.m., the restaurant swelled with the height of dinner service. Matthew was carrying a tray of entrees toward table 9 when he heard the unmistakable sound of Aurora's voice behind him, sharp, clipped, and too close. Matthew. He didn't turn. Not yet. He delivered the plates, making sure the guests were settled, and only then turned around. Aurora stood with her arms crossed, watching him with an expression that held far too many layers for him to decipher on the spot. Her voice softened just enough to signal this wasn't another public attack. Private dining room. Now. He followed her again, though this time the walk felt heavier, not from dread, but from certainty. Something was coming. He stepped inside. She closed the door. "You're disrupting this restaurant." The accusation didn't surprise him. "I'm doing my job." "No," she countered. "You're changing the dynamic. People are talking. The staff is uneasy. The investors are noticing." She said it like it was his fault for being noticed at all. "If the investors are watching," Matthew replied, "that's because of how you interact with me, not because of what I do." Aurora stepped closer. "You turn every word I speak into a challenge. You reflect everything I say back at me. Because everything you say comes with an edge," Matthew answered. "Maybe you don't hear it, but everyone else does." Her eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something like recognition she didn't want to admit. "You think you know me. I think," he said slowly, "that you're not half as sure of yourself as you want the world to believe." The silence after that was colder than the air conditioning. Aurora looked away first. "You presume too much." "Do I?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the nearest chair and sat down abruptly, as if her legs had decided before she did. Matthew had never seen her sit like that, less CEO, more human. "I built this company," she began, almost to herself. "Every inch of it, every contract, every reputation. Do you understand what that means?" "It means you had to fight," Matthew replied. "Harder than most people will ever know." Her head turned sharply toward him. She hadn't expected empathy. She didn't know what to do with it. "But somewhere along the way," he continued, "you started swinging at the wrong people." Aurora laughed under her breath, not amused, but startled. "You think you understand power?" "No," he said. "I understand how it feels when people use theirs to make you small." She stiffened again, but her breath hitched just enough to betray something beneath the mask. A crack, a bruise, a memory, the kind that shaped people long before they stepped into the spotlight. "You are impossible," she whispered. "Maybe," Matthew said, "but I'm not your enemy." Her response was interrupted by a sudden knock. Denise poked her head in. "Miss Whitmore." I'm so sorry, but the investors are asking for you." Aurora didn't move. "Tell them I'll be there in a moment." Denise nodded and closed the door, though her glance at Matthew lingered with worry. When the door shut, Aurora rose, but she didn't leave yet. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of frustration and something else. Something she wasn't ready to name, and something he didn't want to guess. "This isn't over," she said quietly. No, Matthew replied. It's not. She left the room without another word. When Matthew stepped back into the dining area, the atmosphere felt even more charged. The investors' eyes followed Aurora as she joined their table. Denise gestured urgently for Matthew to help at table 12, and he went. But every movement was shadowed by what had just transpired. Something was unfolding, something neither he nor Aurora could push back anymore. As he refilled a water glass, Jamal whispered, "Dude, what did you do now? She's acting weird." "Weird how? Like she's thinking too much." That actually startled Matthew. Aurora Whitmore thinking too much? "I know," Jamal said. "Scary, right?" Matthew didn't laugh. Because he knew, deep down, Jamal wasn't wrong. Something was happening inside Aurora, something shift-like, unstable. And change, for people like her, wasn't smooth. It was volcanic. By the end of the night, Matthew was exhausted. His wrist pulsed steadily with pain, but his thoughts were louder. When he hung up his apron, Dwight approached him again. "Storm's getting louder," Dwight said. "Feels like the wind's about to change direction." "For better or worse?" Matthew asked quietly. Dwight shrugged. "Change don't care which way it blows. Just make sure you're standing when the dust settles." Outside, the night air hit Matthew like a gasp. Cold, real, sharp. He paused under the glow of the streetlight, letting everything settle. Aurora's shifting tone, her vulnerability, her scrutiny, her confusion, her inability to categorize him, and he knew something with absolute clarity. The midpoint wasn't just a shift for their conflict, it was a shift in their dynamic. Dangerous, unpredictable, and nothing would be the same after tonight. He walked into the darkness with one final thought anchoring him. Whatever Aurora was becoming, whatever he was becoming in response, there was no turning back now. Matthew felt the chill of the night long after he made it home. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it came in restless, broken waves, half dreams of Aurora's voice echoing through a glass room, of investors whispering in Japanese, of his wrist throbbing beneath dim restaurant lights. By morning, he was awake before dawn, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. He stared at the steam as it thinned, feeling the weight of everything pressing toward an unseen threshold. Today would not be calm. That much he knew. He left the apartment at 8:40 a.m., giving himself more time than usual for the subway ride downtown. The city seemed louder, faster, more impatient than usual, and he carried its energy with him as he stepped into the Sterling room for the evening shift. Before he even clocked in, he could feel it, an atmosphere so tight it nearly hummed. Denise rushed toward him the moment he entered. "Matthew," she whispered urgently, "you need to brace yourself. Something's happening." "What now?" "Aurora. She's been on the phone all afternoon with corporate. With legal." "Legal?" "Yes," Denise hissed. "Whatever's brewing, it's big, and it's about you." He inhaled slowly, grounding himself. "What did she say?" "Nothing to me. But she asked for all your employment records. Twice." "Great," Matthew murmured. "That's always a good sign." Denise squeezed his arm. "Just stay sharp tonight. Something's shifting." He nodded and moved into the dining room. The moment he stepped in, he saw her Aurora Whitmore standing by the bar in a black suit, sharp enough to slice through tension. Her posture was rigid, chin slightly lifted, eyes focused on something just out of sight. But the second she noticed him, her gaze locked onto him with a severity he'd never seen before. Not just anger, not just scrutiny, purpose. She crossed the room in a few determined strides. "Matthew," she said, "we're talking. Tonight. Don't leave after your shift." "About what?" "About what comes next." He felt the air tighten between them. "And what is that?" "You'll know soon enough," she replied. "But right now, do your job. I want to watch." Her wording was deliberate, meant to sound like evaluation, but it carried something heavier, something like a challenge she hadn't yet named even to herself. Matthew turned away from her and began his shift, but he could feel her gaze on him constantly, like a spotlight shadowing his every move. At 7:15 p.m., he approached table 3 to recite the specials, only for Aurora to suddenly appear beside him, as though she were evaluating the cadence of his breath. He ignored her presence and addressed the customer. "Tonight we have a seared—" "Matthew," Aurora interrupted sharply, "your tone is too informal. Use more professional phrasing." The customer blinked in discomfort. Matthew's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "My tone is appropriate. The guest understands me." Her eyes narrowed, frustration sparking. "Follow the standard phrasing." He turned back to the customer. "Tonight's feature is seared Atlantic salmon with—" "See?" Aurora said under her breath. "You can follow instructions when you choose to." He felt his pulse climb but didn't engage. He finished the table service impeccably and walked away without acknowledging her commentary. That only angered her more. She followed him halfway across the dining room. "You think ignoring me makes you superior?" "I think you're mistaking my silence for disrespect," Matthew replied. "Sometimes silence is restraint." Her breath caught, not quite anger, not quite realization, but something that made her step back. Yet the moment he returned to the service station, she snapped again. "Matthew," she said sharply, "you missed a water refill at table 8. Julia is assigned that table. But I saw you walk past it. Twice. Because it's not my station. Everything in this restaurant is your responsibility while you work here." Matthew straightened slowly, his patience thinning. "Aurora," he said softly, "if you're trying to provoke me, it won't work." She froze. That had hit home. He turned to leave, but she stepped directly into his path. "You don't get to decide how this goes." "Neither do you," he replied quietly. The air between them crackled. The restaurant's background noise seemed to warp around the tension, the pianist slowing mid-phrase as though sensing an approaching storm. Then, without warning, the storm found its spark. A server carrying a tray stumbled behind them, one glass tipping, then another. In a flash, the tray collapsed, and a cascade of crystal shattered across the floor. The crash echoed through the dining room. Startled gasps erupted. The server froze. Customers stared. Denise nearly tripped, rushing over. But Aurora didn't look at the server. She looked straight at Matthew. "Pick it up." The words cracked like a whip. Matthew stared at her. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you want to stay here tonight, pick it up." Her meaning was clear. This wasn't about broken glass. This was a command meant to break him. A public command. Matthew inhaled deeply. Then he knelt, slowly lifting the shards, one piece at a time. His wrist screamed in pain, a sharp pulse with every movement, but he kept his face neutral, not submissive, not defeated, calm, controlled. The investors watched with troubled expressions. A few diners whispered. Aurora stood over him, posture rigid, eyes sharp with the expectation that this act of forced obedience would settle something inside her. But it didn't, because Matthew wasn't breaking. His dignity didn't crack, and that unsettled her more than defiance ever could. When he finished, he stood straight and met her gaze with unwavering steadiness. For the first time that night, Aurora faltered. Something flickered in her expression, confusion, maybe even regret, but she masked it instantly. "My office," she said, after close. Without waiting for his response, she left the room. Once she was gone, the whispers rose behind Matthew like a low current. Dwight approached. "Son," he murmured. Whatever that was, it wasn't about glass. "I know," Matthew replied quietly. "The storm's peaking," Dwight warned. "Brace yourself." Matthew looked toward the hallway where Aurora had disappeared. He felt it too. This wasn't the final confrontation. Not yet. But the fight was no longer simmering beneath the surface. It had reached the boiling point. And when tonight ended, one of them would have to face a truth they'd been avoiding since the moment they first clashed. Power doesn't bend without breaking something. The only question was which one of them would break first. Matthew waited until the last guest departed, until the final chair was aligned, until the kitchen lights dimmed to half power. The Sterling Room after closing always felt like a stage stripped of its actors, quiet, hollow, full of lingering echoes. Tonight, those echoes carried a weight that pressed against his chest. Denise approached him with tired eyes. "She's waiting," she whispered. "In the office." He nodded. She hesitated, then reached for his arm, a small, maternal gesture. "Matthew, whatever happens in there, don't let her push you somewhere you can't come back from." He managed a faint, grateful smile. "I won't." But he wasn't entirely sure. He walked the long hallway toward the back offices, the faint hum of the city leaking in through the service doors, blending with the muted clatter of the dishwasher still running. His injured wrist throbbed with each stride, but his mind was clear. A storm was waiting behind that office door, but he no longer feared storms. He knocked once. "Come in," Aurora's voice answered low, controlled, but carrying a strain beneath the surface. He stepped inside and closed the door gently. The room was small, clutter-free, dimly lit by a single overhead lamp. Aurora stood at the far end, arms folded, though the rigidity in her posture wasn't anger this time. It was tension, unsettled tension, vulnerable tension. She didn't turn to face him immediately. "You made a spectacle out there," she said, staring at the window's reflection instead of him. "You humiliated me." Again, "I didn't say a word," Matthew replied evenly. "Sometimes silence is worse," she snapped. He didn't move. "Is that why I'm here? Because you don't like the way I stay silent?" She inhaled sharply, finally turning to face him. "You don't obey. You don't defer. You don't bow?" He finished for her, her jaw clenched. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Aurora walked behind the desk, placing her palms on it as if steadying herself. "You challenge every assumption I make," she said. "Every rule, every structure, and I don't know what to do with that." "I'm not your subordinate in this room," Matthew answered. "Maybe that's why." Her eyes flashed with something raw, unfiltered frustration. "You think I'm the villain here." "I think," he said slowly, "that you're used to controlling every variable around you. And I'm not a variable." "You're reckless," she insisted. "Defiant. No, you're uncomfortable because I'm not afraid of you." That pierced deeper than anger. He saw it in the flicker of her eyes, in the way she pulled back ever so slightly, as though he had named something she'd spent years denying. "Why aren't you?" she whispered. "Everyone is afraid of me." "Power doesn't scare me," Matthew said. "Cruelty does, and I've met crueler people than you." She leaned back slowly, stunned at the honesty, stunned at how easily he dismantled her armor. "You don't know anything about me," she murmured. "I know enough," Matthew said. "You use sharpness where vulnerability should be. You use authority because you don't trust respect, and you strike fast because someone, somewhere, taught you that striking first is how you survive." Her breath caught quiet, but telling. "You're wrong," she said weakly, but the tremor in her tone betrayed her. "Am I?" he asked. She didn't answer. Not with words. She backed away from him, pacing once, twice before stopping abruptly. "The investors want to meet again tomorrow," she said. "At Whitmore Global. They asked about you by name." "And that bothers you?" "Yes," she said bluntly. "Because if they see you as an asset, they'll question why I treated you like a liability." "You're worried about optics?" "I'm worried about judgment," she corrected, "from people whose opinions matter in my world." He stayed quiet for a moment, letting her words settle. She rarely admitted fear, not even like this. In fragments. "So," Matthew said softly, "what happens next?" She sank into her chair, rubbing her temples as if the day had worn down every part of her. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "you will come to Whitmore Global headquarters. 9th floor, my office. And then I decide your fate." Matthew almost smiled, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "Aurora, that's the oldest power play in the book." "It's not a play," she snapped. "It's reality." "No," he said gently. "It's insecurity. Stop psychoanalyzing me." She burst out. rising from her seat with a sudden intensity that surprised even her. "You're a server, a stranger. You don't get to dissect me like you understand anything about my life." He stepped closer, not threateningly, but with a composure that made her go still. "Then tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me what you're really afraid of." She froze, her lips parted slightly, the question hitting a place she'd buried deep. "You don't want to know. I do." Her voice broke, not loudly, not dramatically. A small fissure. "I'm afraid," she whispered, "that I don't deserve the power I have." The confession stunned them both. It hung in the air between them. Raw, honest, unguarded. Aurora looked away immediately, ashamed of her own vulnerability. "Forget I said that," she muttered. "I shouldn't have, Aurora," Matthew said softly, stopping her spiral. "Power isn't about deserving. It's about how you use it." She swallowed hard. "And you think I use it poorly. I think you use it to protect yourself." She looked up, and for the first time since he met her, she didn't look like a CEO or a billionaire or a woman wrapped in unbreakable armor. She looked human. "You see too much," she whispered. "And you hide too much," he replied. Their eyes held for a long, quiet moment, one that neither could step out of. Not yet. Finally, Aurora straightened, rebuilding the armor piece by piece. "Tomorrow," she said firmly, "you will meet me at the tower, and what happens from there will depend entirely on you." Matthew nodded. "I'll be there." She opened her mouth to speak again, but nothing came out. So she looked at him longer than she should have, and then said quietly, "Good night, Matthew." He reached for the door. "Good night, Aurora." As he stepped into the hallway, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. The crisis had arrived. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here. And tomorrow would demand everything he had left, and more. Matthew barely remembered the train ride the next morning. His body was there, sitting, breathing, gripping the cool metal pole, but his mind was already inside the Whitmore Global Tower, standing in front of Aurora, facing whatever judgment she believed she was ready to pass. His wrist throbbed beneath the bandage, but the pain grounded him. A reminder of the night everything shifted. A reminder that no matter how powerful Aurora Whitmore was, she couldn't break him the way she expected to. At 9:56 a.m., he stepped out of the elevator onto the 9th floor. The carpet was thick, sound-absorbing, the kind meant to make footsteps disappear, but his didn't. He walked with purpose, every step louder than it should have been, carrying him toward the glass-walled corner office at the end of the hallway. Aurora's assistant, a thin woman who seemed permanently startled, stood when she saw him. "She's waiting," she murmured. "You can go in." He nodded, inhaling once before turning the handle. Aurora stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown, the skyline sharpening her silhouette like a blade. She didn't turn right away. Instead, she spoke into the glass, her voice low but steady. "I didn't sleep last night." Matthew stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Why not?" She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "Because I'm not sure what I'm about to do is wise." He wasn't sure how to respond to that. So he didn't. He simply waited. Aurora walked to her desk but didn't sit. She rested her fingertips lightly on the edge, like she needed the grounding. "The investors emailed me again this morning," she said. "About you. And what did they say? That they admire your cultural understanding. That they think you have potential. That they'd prefer to continue discussions with you present." Matthew let that sink in. She continued. "That complicates things for me. Professionally. And personally?" he asked softly. Her gaze flickered, something sharp, something exposed, and then tightened. "Don't push." He nodded once. "All right." She straightened and lifted a folder from her desk. "This is your file, your employee record, performance reviews, incident logs." "There are no incident logs," Matthew said calmly. "Until last night." She opened the folder. "Matthew Johnson, 3 years of employment, no complaints, no disciplinary actions, positive client comments, above average performance, reliable." respected by staff. She closed it again. You are the kind of person I should promote, not fire. The admission was sharp, clean, unexpected. He didn't speak. She began pacing again, her heels tapping softly against the carpet. But then there is the other side, the side of you that undermines my authority, embarrasses me, challenges me in front of international partners. I challenged your treatment of me, Matthew corrected, not your authority. That distinction doesn't exist in my world, she snapped. Maybe that's the problem, he replied. She stopped pacing. A silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, unavoidable. She broke it first. Tell me something, she said slowly. Do you want your job back? Do you want to give it back? She exhaled sharply. You answer my question with a question, because you're not asking what you really want to know, Matthew said gently. Then tell me what I want to know, she challenged. You want to know if I hate you, he said. A breath trembled in her throat. Do you? No, Matthew said. I don't. She looked away too quickly, as if that answer hurt more than it relieved. Then what do you want? She asked quietly. I want dignity, he said. And I want accountability when someone crosses a line, that's all. You think I crossed a line, she whispered, repeatedly. Aurora walked back to the window, her reflection fractured by the glass. People think power makes you fearless, she murmured. It doesn't. It just gives you more to lose. Matthew stepped closer, but not too close. You're not going to lose anything by treating people with respect. Respect, she repeated softly, is not something I was raised with. And there it was, the crack in the marble. She hadn't meant to say that. The confession slipped out like a wound reopening. Matthew didn't push. He waited. After a long moment, Aurora inhaled sharply and turned back to him, armor snapping into place. I have a proposal, she said. Not charity, not pity. He nodded. I'm listening. I want to hire you, she said. Not as a server, but as a cultural and linguistic advisor for Whitmore Global's APAC projects. He blinked. That wasn't what he expected. She continued quickly, as if afraid she might back out if she slowed. You understand nuances I don't. You speak with an authenticity I lack. Investors trust you. You have lived experience I cannot replicate. And if I am going to compete in Japan, I need someone like you. Matthew didn't speak. She misread his silence. If you're worried about compensation, that's not what I'm thinking about, he said. Then what? Why me? The question hit her hard. Her voice softened. Because you're the only person who has ever told me the truth. Without fear, without agenda. She stepped closer, only a step, but it changed the air between them. Because you see me, she whispered, in ways I don't allow people to. Matthew held her gaze for a long, quiet moment. There was something in her eyes now, a plea buried beneath pride, and something in him responding to it against his will. If I accept, he said carefully, I have conditions. Her eyebrows lifted. Name them. First, Matthew said, you will not treat your employees the way you treated me. Her breath caught. Agreed. Second, if you want my expertise, you fund my return to school. I never finished my degree. Done, she said instantly. And third, you establish a scholarship. She stiffened. For who? For black students studying international relations, languages, or cross-cultural business. Not symbolic. Real funding. Long-term. She studied him, searching for something in his expression. You're serious. Dead serious. Aurora exhaled slowly, then nodded. Done. The word was soft, almost reverent. A promise, not a negotiation. Something loosened in Matthew's chest. Something warm. Something dangerous. Aurora extended her hand. Do we have an agreement? Matthew looked at her hand for a long moment before taking it. Her grip was firm, steady, warm. When they released, something had shifted, not just professionally, but in the air between them. Aurora stepped back, clearing her throat. You start Monday. All right. And Matthew? He waited. Thank you, she said quietly, for not hating me. His voice was softer than he expected. Thank you for trying. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened in a way that felt like sunrise breaching a skyline. As Matthew left the office, he realized something profound. This wasn't just a turning point in their conflict. It was a turning point in both of their lives. And tomorrow, the world would look different for them both, even if neither was ready for what that meant. Matthew stood outside the Whitmore Global Tower after leaving Aurora's office, the winter air settling around him like a cold reminder that life didn't pause just because something inside him had shifted. Traffic roared, horns flared, people brushed past with the urgency of a city that didn't know his world had tilted a few degrees. He felt the weight of the past days pressing on him, the humiliation, the confrontation, the unexpected vulnerability, the deal that felt like both justice and risk. But beneath all that, something else stirred. Resolve. A sense of direction he hadn't felt in years. He took a long breath and headed toward the subway, already imagining what he would tell his mother, or maybe not tell. He wasn't sure yet. She didn't need to worry, but she deserved hope. When he arrived home, she was awake in her recliner, wrapped in a blanket, the television murmuring softly. Her face brightened when she saw him. "Baby," she said, "you're home early. Is everything all right?" He knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. "It will be." She studied him with those careful eyes that saw far more than he ever admitted. "Something changed," she murmured. "Today." He nodded. "Yes. In a good way, I think." She smiled faintly, touching his cheek. "I always knew you'd rise above whatever tried to drag you down." Her voice weakened, but her pride didn't. "You're stronger than you think." His throat tightened. He squeezed her hand and let the silence speak for him. That night, he slept deeply, for the first time in weeks, and when Monday came, dawn filtered through his curtains like a quiet invitation to step into a life he hadn't dared imagine. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Whitmore Global's lobby was a cavern of glass and marble, its polished surfaces reflecting ambition from every angle. Business elites moved through the space with brisk confidence, but Matthew's steps were steady, grounded. He wore a clean shirt, a borrowed tie from Jamal, and the same quiet dignity he had carried through every storm. An assistant escorted him to the 9th floor. "She's expecting you," the woman said, leading him to Aurora's office. "Good luck." Matthew wasn't sure if it was encouragement or warning. When he stepped inside, Aurora was already standing beside the conference table. Several binders spread out, a laptop open, and a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. She looked different today, less rigid, more human. Still composed, still powerful, but the sharp edges around her had softened just enough to reveal the woman underneath. "You're on time," she said. "Good. You asked me to be." "I did," a beat past awkward, almost unfamiliar. Then she gestured to a chair. "Sit. We have work to do." Matthew sat. She moved to the other side of the table, but not with the brisk authority she usually carried. Today she seemed measured, as though she was aware that every word mattered. "First," she began, "I spoke with legal. The scholarship fund is already being drafted, and your tuition paperwork will be ready by the end of the week." Matthew blinked. "You didn't waste any time." "I don't waste what matters," she said quietly. She didn't look at him when she said it, which somehow made it more sincere. "Now," she continued, "I need your help understanding something I can't afford to misunderstand again." She opened a binder of APAC reports, cultural nuance, communication differences, where I misstep, what I don't see. Matthew leaned forward slowly. "Are you asking me to critique your leadership?" "I'm asking you," she replied, "to tell me the truth, not the version people give me because of my last name." He considered her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Let's start." For the next hour, They worked not as CEO and server, not as adversaries circling each other, but as two people building something from the wreckage of their conflict. Matthew explained linguistic cues Aurora had misunderstood. He broke down the subtleties of Japanese humility norms, where she had been too forceful, too blunt. He pointed out the difference between authority and dominance in cross-cultural dynamics. And Aurora listened, not defensively, not begrudgingly, but with genuine focus, with curiosity. At one point she said softly, "You make things understandable. That's rare." "You make things intense," he replied. "That's also rare." For the first time, she actually laughed. A small, startled sound she quickly disguised by flipping a page. "Don't do that," she murmured. "What? Make this easier?" He tilted his head. "Does it scare you if it is?" She didn't answer. But her silence did. Asterisk, 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 hours passed. By early afternoon, the binders lay open, the laptop hummed quietly, and Aurora finally sat back, rubbing her temples. "You've given me more insight in one morning than some consultants I've paid 6 figures, she admitted. He gave a small smile. "Should I charge more?" She shot him a look sharp, but not cutting. "Don't push your luck." A knock interrupted them. Her assistant stepped inside. "Miss Whitmore, the board is ready for you." Aurora stiffened. "Already?" "Yes. They said this meeting is mandatory." Matthew watched her expression shift, the confidence flickering. The board rarely summoned her without warning. She rose and straightened her suit jacket. "I have to go," she told him. "Wait here. I'll be back." "You want me to stay?" Matthew asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." She left the room quickly, leaving Matthew alone with the binders, the skyline, and the hum of nerves pulsing beneath the quiet. Minutes stretched, then longer. An hour passed. The sun dipped behind another building, casting long shadows across the office. Finally, the door opened. Not with Aurora's sharp, controlled stride, but slowly, like someone returning from a battlefield they weren't sure they won. Aurora stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. Her expression was unreadable. Exhausted, changed. She exhaled shakily, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked fragile. "What happened?" Matthew asked softly. She approached the window again, staring out at the city she ruled and the city that judged her. "They questioned everything," she whispered. "My decisions, my authority, my leadership, and they questioned you." He tensed. "Me?" "Yes." She turned toward him, eyes shadowed but clear. "They asked why I value your insight, why I'm investing in you, why I'm listening to you. And what did you say?" Aurora swallowed, voice lowering. "I told them the truth, which is," she took a slow breath, "that you are the only person in this company who has had the courage to confront me, to challenge me, to push me to be better instead of bowing." Her voice thickened, not with tears, but with conviction. "And that makes you invaluable." Matthew stood slowly, absorbing the weight of what she'd just confessed, not only to him, but to the board of her billion-dollar empire. "Aurora," he murmured, "that couldn't have been easy for you." "It wasn't," she said. "But it was right." She stepped closer. "You asked for dignity. You asked for accountability. Today, I gave both to myself." A quiet fell between them, not tense, not fragile, but full, something new, something earned. She extended her hand not as a command, not as a test, but as an offering. "Matthew," she said softly, "start with me. Help me build something better than what I was." He looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it. Her fingers closed around his with a steadiness that felt like the final turn of a key in a long-sealed lock. "Then let's begin," he said. For the first time since the day she walked into the Sterling room, Aurora smiled, not triumphant, not forced, human, honest, and together, standing above the city, hand in hand in a room filled with the echoes of conflict and the beginnings of something unspoken, they began a new chapter neither of them could have predicted, A chapter built not on power, but on truth. Not on fear, but on respect. Not on dominance, but on the possibility of redemption. And that, in the quiet end of their storm, was the justice they'd both been searching for all along.